Tonight we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 12 tribes. This story begins on May 18th, 1937, when Gene Spriggs entered the world. Now, Mr. Spriggs was born to a devout Methodist family in East Ridge, Tennessee. We don't know much about his childhood and early life, but we do know that he graduated from the University of Tennessee with a degree in psychology. He was a devout man with a degree in psychology. He was scheming early on what he wanted to do. By the end of the 1950s, Gene had gone through 3 divorces and had 1 kid. After his 3rd divorce, he spent some time as a carny in Chattanooga, and eventually at the carnival, he heard the voice of God like we all do when we're at the carnival. And that was the first time I heard the voice of God, and I believe it's also the first place we met face to face. Now, after Gene had his spiritual awakening behind the carnival tent one night, he decided to pack his bags and make way for California. Like all good Americans who end up in California, Gene did this because God told him to do so. It's in California where Gene will meet his 4th and final wife, Marcia. Now, they're a pretty happy-looking couple. They're going to go on to be figureheads in leaderships in the religious community. After meeting Marcia, they decided they were ready to move back to Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is where they were going to start their teenage ministry in 1972. Now, Gene and Marcia's mission whenever they formed this teenage ministry is that they were looking to attract disgruntled kids who were upset with their parents and society, kids and teenagers. They operated out of a small coffee shop inside of their home called The Lighthouse. The group of kids was dubbed the Light Brigade. He wanted to welcome societal dropouts, veterans, people with past criminal backgrounds, people who needed help finding God and finding themselves. Yeah, good heart. He was in it from the beginning. I'm going to jump ahead a bit here because I want to talk about their recruiting techniques. Aside from trying to attract hitchhikers and vagabonds, they later began a new recruiting technique that is following the Grateful Dead tour and preying on people who need aid after partying too hard, people who are too drunk or too stoned. They have a bus, and as far as I can tell, they still do this today, but they expanded their horizons to include more events. Here's a list of the places that they've been attending recently. Grateful Dead shows, Billy Graham Evangelicalistic Crusades. I did not say that right. Fish concerts. People with fish are already a cult. I feel like this would be the immovable object, meaning the unstoppable force. They went to Woodstock 99. Nobody there got on that bus. They went to Further Fest, Reggae Fest. People at Reggae Fest got on the bus, and then they probably got right back off when they realized it wasn't what they wanted or what they were expecting. The Reset event in Washington, D.C., don't know what that is. Promise Keepers, Rainbow Gatherings, Winter Jam, Gathering of the Juggalos. Just kidding. They didn't do the Gathering of the Juggalos. At least I don't think, but maybe they did. He told all these people that they could eat and live at his house as long as they went to church. Eventually, there were around 50 to 60 people living under one roof. This one roof was Marcia and Gene's house still. By this time, he was attracting people from dissolving Christian hippie groups, people that were referred to as Jesus freaks. The people feared reality and they needed somewhere to go, a life that seemed easier than the alternatives. They were exiting the hippie movement and lost their sense of purpose along the way. Gene and his lost acolytes started attending the First Presbyterian Church to show the community that they were active in the church community and not just a group of hippies all living under one roof. Now I can see why they didn't want to attract any attention. If I saw a house in my neighborhood with 50 people living under it, I'd be curious. And I'd probably be annoyed, to be honest, too. I'm sure having those people go in and out all day long was driving people crazy who lived in the area. Now me, I'd be cheering on Karen from HOA. I'd be peeping out my window, all excited as they hand out that $1,000 fine for having 50 people chilling out in the front yard. Not sorry, I'm getting old. I'm becoming a grumpy old man. At this point, the house had become too small, and even Gene had had enough. Gene was tired of it, and he asked all the people living there to pull together their money and get out of his house because they were all smelly and they weren't taking showers, and he didn't know they weren't going to take showers, and they were eating all his food. They thought they were getting a free ride. But he said, no more. Okay, y'all haven't had to do anything for months now. Pull together your money and go buy some more homes and maybe a business too. Get off the couch. He was kicking them out. It's time to grow up. So after they did this, they were able to buy 3 homes and they had enough money to start another cafe. This time, they called it the Yellow Deli Café. Maybe you've seen one of these. Maybe you've ate at it. If you have ate at it, did they try to recruit you? Because that's what I've read online that they try to do. At this point, the group was now living communally and working communally. All the money they made went into a pot and was used to cover their needs. No one was paid a regular wage. Actually, none of them were paid a wage at all. All the money they made, it went into a pot, and then Gene controlled that, and he would distribute it as he saw fit. They kept this up for a few years and lived somewhat quietly, not attracting too much attention. One lovely Sunday in 1975, the group was on their way to church. When they arrived, they found the doors were locked with a sign hanging that said, "Closed for the big game." This infuriated Gene and his followers. How could the church be closed on Sunday for something so trivial to the Lord? Now, he didn't realize he was in Tennessee, okay? God and the big game, only things that matter. This would end up being the spark that Gene needed to ignite his group into a cult. After Gene and his followers were upset about the church being closed, he took them and they started having their own service in the local park, but they attracted negative attention from the community by doing this. The community wasn't too happy by Gene and his hippies doing prayer in the middle of the park. Gene decided the best way to negate the negative attention was by starting a church that he called the Vine Community Church. And for every church that was opened, they opened the Yellow Deli along with it. Now, the Yellow Delis were important to the Light Brigade. While it made them some money but not much, it played a large part in recruiting college students. The members would work to convince students who were failing or unsure if college was for them to drop out and join the group. They could find themselves. They can find themselves by being in the middle of the park doing hippie stuff with the Jesus freaks. So I found this comment on Reddit from someone who's been to a Yellow Deli. Me and my buddies went in there just so that we could have the experience once, because we knew they were giving out free food and we weren't spending any money. Man, it is such a weird vibe in there. If anyone has seen Midsummer, it has that same energy of uncanny perfection. Everything too good to be true. The care and the dedication put into the space evokes that there must be a sinister intention. Their food is delicious, it smells nice, and the whole inside of the restaurant is all hand constructed out of live edge wood. Ooh, that's hard. But then you see all the women working in the back and all the men with the same exact haircut, and there's no denying something's off. It's almost synonymous with the uncanny valley effect of faces just not being real enough, but in this other weird cult way. So in the accounts I found about the Yellow Deli pretty much said the same thing. It gave off Midsummer vibes if you ever seen Midsummer. When I was researching how the cult recruits college students using cafes, it seems to be the most used method today. They just don't go after college students, but any young adults who eat at their cafes. Here's another comment I found. So we have a Yellow Deli here too, North County, San Diego. They were super into targeting young adults to visit their commune a few miles east. They've toned it down a bit, but I notice new faces every time we eat there. They leave me alone since I have tattoos. Oh, sinner. So I can enjoy my food in peace. Now on a website called Chattanooga.com, I found this article from a woman who actually joined the cult by eating at their University of Tennessee Chattanooga location. Now this is their most infamous location for this recruitment technique. The article was written in 2006. She was eventually transferred to Dalton GA compound, which we'll talk about in a bit. Now, by 1978, the group started to attract a lot of unwanted attention and eventually had local anti-cult groups investigating them, which were cults within themselves. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I'm just making things up right there. Don't quote me on that. I didn't investigate the anti-cult groups. I only investigated the 12 tribes. But it was around this time that the Light Brigade officially changed their name to the 12 Tribes and began to expand outside of Tennessee. Now this was due to the growing tension towards the group in the Chattanooga community. Gene had been offered a minister position at a small church in Island Pond, Vermont. That's a pretty nice looking super small town. They just need to throw in a Walmart or a Costco. If they put a Costco down there, they'd have the real cult. We got them $1.50 hot dogs. While Gene declined the job offer, he still decided to start moving the 12 tribes to Vermont anyways to try and escape the anti-cult groups coming after them in Chattanooga. So he declined his job offer, but he said, you know what? I'm going to take this as an invitation to move my people here. So he packed up their bags into Island Pond, VA, or Island Pond, Vermont they went. Once they arrived, Spriggs opened up the northeast Kingdom Community Church. Due to economic reasons, though, and trying to avoid negative attention, Gene started closing Yellow Deli restaurants in 1979, but left one open in Dalton, GA. Dalton, GA seemed to be of importance to them for a while. We know in 2006 it was still around because that's where they moved the woman from that article. But as of 2024, it looks like Dalton, GA location has been moved to Brunswick, GA. At this time, most of the members were moving to either Vermont or New England for the cult's missions, whatever those may be. It did not take long for the town of Island Pond to grow suspicious of their new neighbors, though, and a group called the Citizens Freedom Foundation was hot on the trail of the 12 tribes, and they began conducting meetings in Burton, Vermont, to warn townsfolk of who and exactly what the 12 tribes were. The Citizens Freedom Foundation was looking into the 12 tribes for suspected child abuse, and that was the motive that they were pushing on the citizens of Burton, Vermont, and the Island Pond. Now, up until this point that we're about to cross, the 12 tribes were just seen as the weird Jesus freak hippies that were strict about their religion, kept to themselves, and lived communally, and convinced college kids who have a 2.0 GPA that they should drop out and come live off the land. But going forward, it's going to get dark. In 1983, charges were brought against a man named Charles Eddie Wiseman, an elder of the cult, for misdemeanor of simple assault. And it was anything but simple. And this was going to be the beginning of many of the cult's problems to come. Now, the charge was simple assault, but what Wiseman had did was beat a 13-year-old child named Darlene with a balloon stick, this white plastic rod, for kissing the boy, give him a little peck, while she was hit from her shoulders to her ankles, causing bleeding. Wiseman was reported by the father of the child, who was also a member of the cult, and once he saw his daughter and asked what had happened. Now, a few days later, the father dropped the charges, claiming it was a misunderstanding and that the anti-cult group were pressuring him to exaggerate the abuse. He says the anti-cult activists were involved. How would they have pressured him? I mean, maybe the story got out about what happened and they went to him and he was like, yeah, I'll say what I need to say. But it blows me away. A child could be beaten that badly. There's physical evidence, but nothing happened to the guy because the parent dropped the charges. Nothing happened to Wiseman, I mean. So again, this was investigated. Wiseman was detained, but because the father dropped the charges, he was released. It's crazy. I know where I'm from, that wouldn't have happened. The state can pick up the charges and continue onward if you have committed a form of abuse. Now, the state authorities are trying to build a case and get a warrant, but they struggle to do so because the victims are all homeschooled and they rarely are allowed to leave the cult compound. It is later that the authorities decided they would summon 7 of the cult elders and ask them to provide information detailing how many children live on the property along with their names, and they were arrested but then released shortly after. Finally, in 1984, Vermont State Police and Vermont Social Rehabilitation Services obtain a warrant and they rescue 112 children. Praise the Lord. Am I right? This time they got them. This time the kids are safe. All's good. Just kidding. Prosecutors are unable to get a court order for examination of signs of bodily harm or abuse. Why? Well, the judge said that the raid had been grossly illegal and the warrant wasn't specific enough as it did not list the names of the children they wanted to examine. So all 112 kids were turned back over to their parents and the cult. Wiseman's lawyer, a public defender named Jean Swantico, she filed 5 times to have the case dismissed, and eventually the judge did so, and he said, "For almost 2 years, the defendant has experienced a financial and emotional disruption of his personal life. The defendant has received both written and oral threats to his life. His profession as a preacher has been harmed because of the publicity surrounding this charge has evoked great hatred and hostility directed toward him." So the judge did take the side of Wiseman. He mentioned that it was because his reputation as a preacher had been damaged from these allegations. Whenever there was proof, terrible on the judge's part. The judge was either paid off or he admired what the cult was doing. Jean, Wiseman's lawyer, she definitely admired it because she ended up joining the cult after the trial and marrying Wiseman. So there you go. Town wants these people gone. Cops want these people gone. social services want to save these kids, but the judicial system is failing them at every turn. After Wiseman beat the case, Gene decided to make June 22nd the first holiday that the tribe would celebrate, and that holiday was deemed the Day of Deliverance. Anyways, this holiday was to celebrate the day they beat the state of Vermont, and it is celebrated similar to Passover. After the events in Vermont, Gene doubled down on building the 12 tribes. He changed his name to Yonak, and the first order of business was addressing the treatment of children. He was just so upset about what Wiseman did. Just kidding. Gene really appreciated Wiseman's approach to children, so Gene decided to create an environment that made it impossible for kids to leave. He mandated that kids cannot be born outside the compound, no public schooling, and they will apprentice in church business.
It's their treatment of children that has sparked international headlines.
How old are you?
You tell her.
10.
This hidden camera investigation aired on US television in 2018, filming young children of the 12 tribes being forced to work on their farms and on factory assembly lines.
Factories? We don't have factories.
We have videotape of it, sir.
Children can only attend school for a couple years before starting work. No physical contact between the opposite sex were allowed. Those caught doing something as simple as hand-holding would be forced to marry. And yes, marriage started as early as 13 and was typically prearranged around this time. Don't know if it's still that way, but around this time in the 80s, this is what they were doing. Gene introduced a protocol of abuse, which was detailed in his brochure, When the Spankings Stop. In the brochure, Gene cited Proverbs 13:24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly.
A Current Affair has heard numerous accounts of Australian children at the hands of the tribes being beaten with rods from a very young age at their communes in Picton and in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney.
Now, this proverb isn't bad by itself. Discipline takes many forms. It helps children understand right from wrong. But Gene used this as a way to justify physical and mental abuse. I quote from Gene, "If you love your child, you will take up the rod to discipline early, often, and hard enough to leave blue marks," as you call them, which were bruises. This was Gene's interpretation of the Proverbs 13:24. Now, infants were not spared the rod because discipline had to start early and often. They were hit with balloon sticks for doing what babies do, dropping their bottles, squirming during diaper changes. This is terrible. Older children were hit using bamboo canes, and the brochure taught members that children are born to do what's wrong. It's better to go to heaven with welts, as they said, than to hell without welts. What they're doing is just so sick. If you've ever interacted with a baby, babies are not doing what's wrong. Babies are doing what's natural. And it's our job to take care of them. I cannot imagine hitting a baby or a child. And as we'll find out, the people who are actually parents in this cult, they couldn't imagine it either. I tried finding pictures of the brochure, but evidence from the 12 tribes is hard to find. They do have a long list of books on their website that they have written, but that is not one that they own up to. However, here is what an ex-leader of the cult had to say about the rules put in place for children. Now note that he no longer feels this way, and we'll discuss that later.
How did you feel about the attitudes within the 12 tribes of the severe disciplining of children?
How did I feel about
Yeah.
it? I thought it was great. At the time, I thought it was fantastic.
Why?
I thought it was...
Why?
You can come up with an argument that says, hey, children need boundaries. They're insecure without them.
Gene would spend a great deal of time coming up with forms of discipline, but two methods common among parents were withholding meals and locking children in a dark room, sometimes for days. They would be made to write out a list of their sins, and the children barely knew what their sins were, well, because they weren't actually committing any sins. So, moving on from child abuse, and on to the next hot topic of Gene's teachings, racism. A tale as old as time, and the way Gene explained it is, well, like his child care methods, terrible. But that's what Spriggs does, though. He sits around and tries to come up with terrible things to do and terrible ideas. Now again, he refers to the Bible and points at the curse of Ham for his next teaching, which is that slavery is okay, specifically slavery of black people. His argument isn't unheard of amongst racist groups, especially in the Deep South. It's just an excuse that racists use to try and justify their way of thinking. Now, for those who don't know the story of the curse of Ham, this is how it's explained. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." So the curse of slavery was to carry on to his son Canaan and all of his descendants, suggesting that all of Ham's descendants are black because of his name. It's all a bunch of bull caca. It's evil people interpreting something to justify their terrible doings. Now, Spriggs tells his followers that slaves who remain loyal till death would be made kings when Jesus returns. Now, I only found one comment online suggesting they saw someone in the 12 tribes who wasn't white, but it didn't seem credible. I think for the most part, anyone who isn't white stays away. It's ironic though, because everyone in this cult is basically a slave to Gene. He uses them for free labor and takes all the money that they make. Now, the 12 tribes were different than other cults at the time when it came to excluding people. For example, the Jim Jones cult was known to be openly integrated. He did not discriminate against who he took with him. He was also known to be a supporter of the civil rights movement. So where does the cult go from here? And well, in the late 80s and 90s, the 12 tribes started laying roots overseas. They built communities around the world. Here's a list from their site of where they're located. The businesses were doing well at this time, and so was the hate preaching as it grew to include more groups of people, including the gay community. He preached that AIDS were God's plague and punishment on gay men. Spriggs was always looking for a new group of people to target and finding reasons to punish them in his eyes. You know, it was children, then it was black people, then it was gay people, and now it's women. He began by banning women from using birth control. He banned them from using painkillers. He banned them from pain-relieving medicine during birth. And by this point, you've guessed it, he has his biblical reason on why women can't use pain medicine during birth. He has biblical reasons for all of his hurtful decisions. Well, Gene decided that how would a woman ever atone for Eve's original sin? Briggs convinced the women in his tribe that the way they would atone for this would be through child labor. It was their curse to bear for the sins that Eve committed. I mentioned earlier, he really likes just sitting around and coming up with ways to hate people and inflict pain on them. Harsh punishments were the foundation of the cult, but as Briggs got older, it became worse. It became part of the framing. It became part of the walls, the finishing details. It's all that he focused on. Now, up till now, members had something of a family life outside of the cult. They would go camping, have outings, take trips, but that was all being taken away by Gene. He was focused on locking down the cult. And you see, the cult was starting to fall apart at this point. Its members were leaving. They were burned out on the lifestyle, grew out of it, or more importantly, they were starting to have kids of their own. Turns out, whenever it's your kid that must receive the lashings, the program doesn't sound so great anymore.
Before I had children, this was fine. I loved it. You have your own, and life takes on a different flavor. And smacking your own little human being on the bed there sounds different all of a sudden.
Members that had family outside the cult were also leaving in large amounts. People who I mentioned, they either burned out or realized that the direction the cult was going was a bit too extreme for them. Now, the most negative impact that Gene and the cult felt were members who brought something of value were now leaving. These were members who brought land, houses, money, vehicles, anything. When they left, they were taking them back. And as you can imagine, Gene wasn't happy about losing these resources. So Gene made a rule going forward that any new members who joined had to sign over anything of value. This way they couldn't take it back when they left. I don't know how he enforced it, but people who came into the cult with nothing left with nothing. People who came in with something left with nothing. With the families leaving, Gene and the elders began to send parents and children to different communities to prevent them from getting any ideas of leaving. So where are the 12 tribes now? Where is Mr. Gene Spriggs himself? Is he back behind a carnival tent? Or is he hiding away on the island? Well, no, he had passed away, fortunately, on January 11th, 2021. It was rumored he passed away due to COVID, but that's not confirmed. He was 83 years old, and hopefully he was very uncomfortable, locked in a dark room with no food, being forced to write out his sins. So the 12 tribes are still around today. They still have multiple communities. There is one about an hour from me out in the rural town and farming community. There is a mixture of strict communities and some that aren't as strict or enforce the cruel ideas of Gene. In my research, I found accounts that the communities have helped those with no structure or guidance in their life, people who can't adapt to normal society. And I can understand that if you're someone who's looking for structure and you find these people and, they aren't being their kids or being racist, it might be convincing to stick around and see where it goes, especially whenever you can just leave at any time. I mean, it's easier to leave if you came with nothing. From what I've seen in my research online, it does vary from community to community now, how they enforce their practices, although I'm sure they're all similar to some extent. Comments I found online from people who live near one of the compounds say that activity has died and people hardly know that they're there. I can say I had no idea that we had one near us. Here's the comment I found from I Am a Simple Bastard. These f***ing guys have had property down the road from me for what feels like most of my life. It clears out every few years, then they try to sell it, and eventually end up filling back up again like a cycle. When hiking nearby, I used to hear some spooky shit from up there, screaming and crying and the like. One time I got to talking to one of the guys I ran into on a trail, got curious, and he ended up giving me a grand tour of the property. They had all of the women and children hide on the third floor while I was on site. I had a sample of granola they were making. It was pretty good shit. Then they tried inviting me back to their communal music nights and the like. But unbeknownst to them, I already knew what their deal was. I had an older cousin following with them years prior that my aunt and uncle brought home at gunpoint. How exciting. From I Am a Simple Bastard. Currently, the 12 tribes own 66 properties, totaling $36 million in property value across the United States. In 2023, they listed a Peppercorn Creek farm for sale at $6 million. And I couldn't find if it sold someone outside the cult, but I did find an article saying it sold to one of the cult's holding companies, but that could just be a rumor. It isn't unheard of, though, for these type of organizations or people who don't want their public information to be known what kind of property they're buying to use holding companies. They also still own multiple businesses that bring in millions every year. Construction is a big one for them. I did find an article from an ex-member that reported he helped one of their businesses earn $6 million, but the guy never saw a penny of it. He was even struggling to clothe his daughter. The cult told him that they would be providing for him. That's what they tell these people, but they weren't really doing that. So the cult does spend their money on expanding and acquiring real estate, but they aren't always buying property, so where is all this money going? There were rumors that Spriggs was spending it taking vacations, but people who lived on his compound said he never left. But maybe he was. Maybe it was like a Kim Jong-un situation, and he had a decoy of himself set up. And the pictures I've seen of these guys, they all look the same. He could have just had a doppelganger while he went to the Bahamas for the weekend. They do have a lot of money. They have a lot of money. Are they stockpiling it? Are they spending it somewhere off the books? Maybe the elders are pocketing it and then using to exit the cult and retire on. The most recent controversy of the 12 tribes that went mainstream was in 2021 when they had a trash burning on their property, ended up causing the Colorado Marshall Fire. Now, this was a very well-known fire. The fire was the most destructive in Colorado's history. It burned over 6,000 acres, over 1,000 homes, causing 2 deaths. People still do blame the cult for this fire, but if you read into the investigation of it, it was discovered that the fire started because of embers from a fire marshal approved burn that reignited 6 days later. Hurricane force winds pushed the fire into a sparking power line, and then it created the Marshall Fire. Now, I gotta say, I don't think the tribe was actually in the wrong for this. I mean, they had a marshal come out and approve their burn. Everything was good to go. It was just an unfortunate sequence of events that happened. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about the 12 tribes, more so the workings of Gene Spriggs. If you want to see more videos like this or have any suggestions for topics to research, or you have your own experience of the cult, let me know in the comments. Now the channel is still new and I need some engagement to figure out which direction to take it. I also need to please the algorithm god. So give me some blood for the blood god. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. See you in the next one.